Hello, welcome back to the Michael Sisco Show. Welcome. Let's get a few more people in here. Welcome, Matt McNasty, Matt Langley. Welcome, uh, and welcome back to the newly. It's no longer Hearth and Fire, but welcome back to the show, Professor Rachel Brown. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And I love your intro music. That's very rousing.
Oh, thank you. Here's my boomer moment. There's my boomer moment. Happened a little earlier than usual, but
Oh well, if you only have to have one per episode, then you're done, right?
yeah, that's true.
Or do
Because
they cascade? Once you've had one, you just keep having them.
No, it's just one because I use Entropy for the super chats because, well, for one, I get to keep more of the money, and I don't have 1,000 people on YouTube yet. So
I told you what my appearance fee was for tonight, right? You're going to honor that, yes?
I think it was not asking a particular question, but
no, that wasn't part of the fee.
I must have missed the fee. What? Let's just.
You have to tell me how you did your great intro. I mean, the production quality is definitely up from when we were just audio back in April, right? You clearly spent your COVID time well.
Well, I actually I had to give credit to my business partner for that one. He co-owns the company with me, and he happens to be he does that for a living, video editing and production and stuff. So
right, so send him to me, right? Yeah, I just need an intro.
Yeah, that one we use basically that we purchased like stock music and stock images, and I use a site called Pond5 because it's super cheap. Here I am advertising and giving away all my secrets on the internet, but
well, you should. Transparency, it's like Penn and Teller, right? You know, you show off your magic tricks and show how you did them. And people are still impressed, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I never mind. I helped another guy that recently started a YouTube channel, and I got him all set up. I was like, this is what I use, blah, blah, blah. And so, you know.
But this is really good. This is the way we build the community that you and I both want to have, right? It's like you don't like Gollum away your secrets. You share.
It's true. It's true.
See, I did it. I did it just then, right there. That's how you do it.
Gollum. Well, we are talking about the Lord of the Rings today, so. But you've banished me from speaking about my favorite character in the whole.
I
series.
said that I'd actually already talked about him, but if you want to bring him up, I suppose we can do
it. But anyway, what have you been up to since April? Anything new on the university front?
No, we've been all stuck at home making videos. So in the spring, right, spring quarter at UChicago, we went online and happily, sort of in one of these happy accidents that I think we're actually having a good number of. I was teaching my Tolkien course for campus. So I got to, I obviously spent a fair amount of time on just videos and radio and podcasts and stuff like that over the last several years, but I'd not actually taught a live stream in effect. And I tried to explain this to whoever would listen back in the spring, different techniques that I had picked up from watching people's live streams, like how to use the chat and like how to make sure your lighting's good and stuff like that. And so I actually had a lot of fun teaching by Zoom in the spring. I'm curious about how you have your music for this setup, because I figured out how to do like share music and share slides and everything like that. So full multimedia production of my Tolkien videos, but those of course are part of my university teaching. And so what I think we're here to talk about is my unauthorized teaching, which is drawing. It's drawing on obviously what I've learned teaching the course at University of Chicago for, well, I teach it every third year, and I've taught it since 2005. So it's had a number of iterations. But what I've been doing this summer is following up my medieval history series on unauthorized TV with The Forge of Tolkien, which is, it's not identical to my campus course, obviously, because I can't assign you reading. If you're just if you're watching videos, I'm not, sort of challenging you on, do you understand what he says in this letter or something? So it's been fun for me because I've been trying to translate my own teaching practice with texts and close readings and such into this new format. So it's been fun.
Yeah.
I'm on episode. I just this week I recorded episode 14. They're airing a little bit behind my own recording schedule, so I think episode 11 just aired this week.
Nice. Yeah, I need to. I plan to watch it after this interview, of course. So I'm just gonna binge watch every episode.
Well, good, and there's 11 up.
Well, we got an interesting comment already, actually. George Giordano. When I first started exploring Orthodoxy, one thing that I couldn't understand at the time is why Orthodox Christians are seemingly obsessed with Tolkien. I can actually explain that. Because
Orthodox as opposed to Catholics, or Christian, or Orthodox as opposed to Christians. What's the comparond here?
I think he's saying there is in Orthodox Christianity quite an obsession with Tolkien, but I certainly can see the same among like traditional Catholics as well. But the reason would be because our theology with the passions, the ring represents, the just the underlying story, and assumptions are very much aligned with traditional Christian theology. So I think that's why.
Well, but it's okay. Yes. and when I teach the course at Chicago, I cross-list it as history fundamentals, which is a degree that we have for close reading of a text, right? And so since the course is focused on the Lord of the Rings and reading that, I get to cross-list it with fundamentals. But I also list it as religious studies. Notice I do not list it as English. And the religious studies, it's like history, religious studies fundamentals is a nice nexus for me to explain what I'm trying to do with it, because it is, in fact, I used to say it was like stealth theology. Now it's this, the cat's out of the bag and it's not really stealthy. But the thing is, no, I think Tolkien is kind of doing stealth theology as compared with, for example, C.S. Lewis, whom everybody knows was trying to write theology directly into his stories. But Tolkien was doing it, and I in the questions you sent me that you wanted to talk about, other than Tom Bombadil, what you're asking me about things like history and such, that what Tolkien does is give a completely Christian understanding to the problem of history and creation. And, I think Christians pick up on that because, they understand the sympathy in the story with the need to appreciate the relationship between the created world and our own artistic activity.
Yeah,
as sub-creators. Sub-creators is Tolkien's term, right? So in the Forge of Tolkien, I'm at the stage in the series right now where I'm still setting up the sort of method that he used. Starting with the questions of mythology and history and stuff like that. But there's some deep problems in it. And the second episode, it's the second or third episode. No, it's the third episode, is on Mythopoeia, which is the poem that he wrote for C.S. Lewis on why myths can contain truth. And there's the great phrase in it that, we make still by the law in which we are made. And he's defending artists. He's defending the sort of creativity of, telling stories, and that storytelling is a participation in creation, and that we do it, made in the image and likeness of an artist. And that throughout is the sort of rich depth of his theological claim, which is different from, he never directly tries to, he certainly doesn't try to teach Trinitarian theology, which could be interesting to think about. But he's also quite sort of indirect in teaching incarnation or salvation, although most of his characters have some Christ element in them. So
yeah. So what was it? Was it actually the Lord of the Rings that inspired you to study medieval history? And what's the tie-in there?
Well, I read Lord of the Rings young enough that I could probably give it first credit, but I think I didn't read it as the very first. I have other stories. There's a wonderful story Now I've forgotten who the author is, The Door in the Wall, which is about a monk, a young man who he's supposed to be a knight, and he gets polio, I think. And so he can't walk anymore. He's not going to be able to be a knight. And he's sent to live with some monks while his parents are away. And he learns to wood carve and play the harp. And, the door in the wall is a lovely image for which something I think our mutual friend E. Michael Jones would say. God has a plan for your life, right? And you can end up with one door closes and you have to be able to see where the door opens over there. If you want to know why I ended up being a medievalist, I think that story is probably even more fundamental for me because I read it younger. But The Lord of the Rings has been with me since I was 11. And that, what I just described about the sense of creation and storytelling in history has informed the way I think about the study of history itself. And sort of my scholarship has been on scriptural interpretation and finding the stories within commentary and so forth. By now everything folds into everything else, and it's very hard for me to say which one thing was the key, right? It kind of like talking about where Tolkien got his ideas, and that's why I've done 14 episodes still talking about whether it was philology or history or is it his desire for time travel, it is his dream theory, it's all of the above, right? Myth.
Yeah, have you heard anything about the I know he was supposed to do a time travel book, since I think he made a deal with C.S. Lewis. Hey, if you do a space one, I'll do a time travel. But he never actually did it. But have you heard of that?
That's episode 7, 8. No, I forget which one. It's the first one on that problem is called Time Travel Toss-Up, and talking specifically about that why Lewis and he thought that they needed one space story and one time story. That Tolkien was also interested in space travel, and there are two different draft stories that he tried to write to do the time travel one. One's The Lost Road, and I'm sitting here with all my books, so that's fine. The Lost Road is in this volume of History of Middle Earth. It's volume 5, and then the other one. I can do this without spilling my wine. The other one is in Sauron Defeated, which is the Notion Club papers, and the Notion Club papers is actually, it's the richest methodological argument that Tolkien made for what he was trying to write, and that's, I do several episodes that are based around the Notion Club papers, and that's where he talks about his theory of dream travel, his theory of where his languages are coming from. He has. The time travel thing for him is, both he and C.S. Lewis are reading J.W. Dunn, which, I'm just going to end up pulling all the books that I've been using to make those. T.S. Eliot also referenced that in Burt Norton, right? Time present and time past are both present and time future. That is a reference to this theory of dream travel that all of them were very caught up in this idea that by dreaming they could go through time. So yes, I definitely know those texts, and I talk about them at length. Although I just got an email from someone, Bruce Charlton, who has a blog specifically on the Notion Club papers and has been writing about it in depth. These are kind of open secrets in the Tolkien conversation, but it's interesting at what point you encounter them. In studying Tolkien, whether there's a sort of iceberg problem, right? It's like, do you just know the movies? Do you know just The Hobbit? Do you know only the books? What level have you gotten down to? Do you read Tolkien's scholarship as well? I talk about some of that in the I try to weave it all in so that it's my conversation with Tolkien is different from Corey Olsen. Corey Olsen we're both Columbia graduates, which I find delightful. His method is much more close reading through the story, and mine is more pull in all these different strands and look at themes. So far, although I like, I think I'm learning a lot listening to the Tolkien professor, Dr. Olsen, do his readings. Those are also helpful.
I'm kind of new to the whole Tolkien thing. I was kind of like George here, where I'm like, why do these Orthodox people, they're obsessed with Tolkien? So I was like, I'm 32. Maybe it's time that I actually read The Lord of the Rings. And so this
Gotcha.
year,
Okay.
I think I actually started during the lockdown, I think is when I started. And I cranked through it pretty fast because, we were on lockdown. And
Okay, so you're talking to someone who read it so long ago. I can't even. It's like what was your impression reading it?
So I've been a hardcore C.S. Lewis fan for quite a while. So it's weird that I hadn't read it. My impression, it felt. I mean, it accomplished, I think, what I think any fantasy sets out to do, where it makes you feel like you're. Well, I don't know that it actually made me feel like I was in a different world. Like it felt
it
like
shouldn't, because it's supposed to be Middle Earth, which is
that's what I'm
our
saying.
habitation.
It did. It felt like I was reading an account of a real historical event in my history, if that makes any sense.
Well, and that's what he wanted to achieve, right? I think that's I'm working through that problem in the episodes I'm recording now, and the problem of exactly where he places his timeline is I think that's the next episode I want to do. So yes, you're right. But the thing is, it should feel like that, because as far as he was concerned, he was writing into the past that you had hints of in the present, in languages and nursery rhymes and archaeology and landscape and so forth.
Yeah, but it was also 100% relatable. Like the struggle with the ring, like that's. I mean, that's life pretty much. Trying to let go of the the ring. So,
well, our friend Mike Jones has a theory about the ring, that it's in fact a symbol of usury. Which I am now. No, it's like I'm going to like reference everybody. We want to build community. I was on Owen Benjamin's live.
Hey now, no anti-Semitism here.
Hey,
I'm kidding.
we were. Owen is good friends with Mike Jones too, so sorry, you're in it. And I talked with him about this theory of the usury in the gold, right? This gold ring that when you put it on, you become invisible, and of course that sort of that invisible effect of what happens when you lend it interest, any interest, right? If there's a big discussion going on my Facebook today because somebody made a nice meme about Heinrich Pesch and quoting the Pope on, how the 13th, one of the 13th century popes, on how usury is bad, and that the ring, I think this works to a large extent across both the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, but it's what you're saying is like most people read the ring and see it as kind of an addiction of some sort, right? It's like that thing that you find yourself drawn to, but the primary addiction that the ring carries is power. That's right. True. That power, not just your addiction, right? But it's the desire to dominate other wills. And that Sauron is able to, by way of capturing the power of the other rings and give rings to the men, they become insubstantial and invisible, but terrifying, right? This is a pretty good metaphor for debt. and the way in which getting yourself into debt monetarily, but also physically with things like pornography and so forth, it destroys your will, which is the problem that the Lord of the Rings is trying to show, right? The degree to which Frodo is ultimately able or not to resist that temptation.
Matt McNasty, the usury connection was so good, I almost crashed my car. So you're causing car accidents.
Stop driving while you're listening to me, Matt. Pull over.
Well, it's okay if he has the auxiliary hooked up. I mean, it's okay.
Ask a real question, Matt.
Yeah. Mike Controversy basically pointing out that Tolkien was an awesome writer that captures the traditional spirit, and that's why we all love him. So
Yes, and I've done. So I'm just gonna. You asked me to talk about my series, so I'll just keep pitching different episodes. That I've done an episode specifically on the style of his poetry, which is about the problem of Christian poetry, right? What it means to say that his poetry is actually Christian, and it revolves around this question of the Sermo Humilis that Eric Auerbach explores in Mimesis, which is the representation of reality in Western literature. That Tolkien is able to range across both comedy, tragedy more in the Silmarillion really than the Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is a comedy because it has the eucatastrophe at the end, but that he has, the hobbits in nursery rhyme style and the elves in high lyric style and the dwarves with their ballads and the men with their alliterative heroic verse and such. That the characteristic of Christian style is this mixing of the sublime topic, this Sermo Sublimis, right? That in antique rhetoric would be, reserved for the matters of the gods and things like that, with the low style, the Sermo Humilis, which should have been comedic and sort of concerned with lower class people and lower class issues. And that what Auerbach showed was that Christian literature blends those because that's what God did, right? Become incarnate, empty himself and enter into our embodied incarnate existence, and by lowering himself lift all of us up, right? And that you can express that in literature by the mixture of styles. See, this is all much more. I mean, Tom Bombadil is actually fascinating, but there's a lot more than just Bombadil.
It's true. It's true. I like who interests me as well. You can actually we can switch out Tom Bombadil. But is it true? Anna asks, is it true that Tolkien influenced C.S. Lewis towards becoming a Christian?
Absolutely, and that's that poem I just mentioned, the Mythopoeia, right? That it was written. That the lore is that it was written after Lewis and Hugh Dyson and Tolkien took a walk in the garden one evening, and they were talking about the problem of mythology, which interested all of them. But Lewis was still at that point sort of enchanted by the desire for the myths to be true, but not really clear that they could be. And Mythopoeia was the sort of product of Tolkien's trying to explain to Lewis that myths could contain truth and how. He wrote that poem, saying, I think in 1931. So it's there in the background of everything, right? All of the conversations they have about writing the time travel, about writing the stories that they like. It's what kind of myth making, history making, story making captures that sense of reality, right? There's another famous essay, which I haven't actually done a proper episode on yet, on fairy stories, where Tolkien talks about how in the Gospels, that story, the story of the Gospels is a story where myth and history have met and fused, right? What is mythology has also become history, and it's true. And it's funny because Lewis, Lewis doesn't credit Tolkien as powerfully as in Tolkien's story he's credited with influencing Lewis, if that makes sense. I mean, in Lewis's own Surprised by Joy, he doesn't really emphasize Tolkien that much. But it could be because they also had a bit of a falling out after Lewis became better friends with Charles Williams. And you could see, we're going to do little Lewis, right? The space travel story that Lewis wrote was the trilogy, right? Out of a Silent Planet, Pure Landra, and That Hideous Strength. And if you know those stories, you know that they're kind of different in character, right? Out of a Silent Planet is Lewis's Tolkien story, right? Ransom is the philologist, and they want to go to Mars and talk to the now and have rational conversation with these other beings and so forth. Pure Landra is Lewis's retelling of Paradise Lost, right? The Milton. And then that Hideous Strength,
which is my favorite, even though most people don't.
Well, it's pretty creepy, right? And that sort of creepiness is, Tolkien said that was really, that's William's influence showing up, right? That sort of high, that level of deep sort of occult creepiness is from Williams.
Yeah, well, I thought that that hideous strength was pretty. I thought I thought it was a pretty good descriptions of how our institutions work now. To be honest,
Yeah. Yes. No, the way see, we're not talking about Tolkien anymore. The way Mark gets enticed to join NICE, which I forget. I don't remember what NICE stands for, but the institute, right?
yeah,
And that Lewis is devastating on that desire to belong to the inner ring, right?
yep.
And the way Mark gets drawn into what is in fact a diabolical project to take over the town, and it's the the best description of the way academia works. and it feels like prophecy of the sort of destruction of the institutions that we're experiencing now, but it had already started in their day, which is interesting to consider, right? COVID lockdown, whatever.
Yeah. I kind of I kind of want to go back and read the Space Trilogy again, just because it's honestly still my favorite, probably my favorite piece of literature, at least as a series, which I haven't met too many people that feel the same way, but I love the Space Trilogy.
I think you'll find there are people out there that like it a lot, but it's different in character from the Narnia, of course.
Yeah.
But Lewis there's some moments when he is just spot on in his observation about human interaction, people's interactions, right? He's very, very skilled at describing those social settings, social scenes.
Yeah, we'll have to do a completely separate episode on the Space Trilogy. Maybe
Okay.
maybe one per book. We'll have to go through all of them. And Paralandria, man, it's all good. It's all insanely good. But back to the Lord of the Rings. Well, I guess this is Lord of the Rings. Oh, we're prot bashing. How dare you, Matthew? How dare you? But the same reason Orthodox Christians are pro Narnia.
Who's saying we're prot bashing?
I'm
not bashing anybody.
We're not. My commenter, Matthew. Matthew is prot bashing, but it's okay. I endorse prot bashing. It's all right. Apparently he says plenty of prots have no idea why Narnia is so allegorical to Christianity, taking up our cross, leaning on our brothers and sisters, overcoming obstacles, demons and witches, enduring the journey of life, choosing to take it to begin with, and walking through the door of paradise. That's what it's all about. And you see that in the Lord of the Rings too. It's just a little more or a little less explicit. It's more covert. It's covert.
Right. All of this is way more layered than you guys seem to have discovered so far. If you want to know the secret to Narnia is Michael Ward's Planet Narnia, which is just like Alan Watts.
No, you're gonna have to pull the layers apart for us.
But so Michael Ward, Planet Narnia, you must read. And the thing is that what he shows is the way the Space Trilogy goes together with the Narnia stories, that they're both about space, right? And that the books of Narnia are actually based on the planets. And if you remember the scene, when in Out of a Silent Planet, Ransom's in the pod, right? In the Notion Club papers, which we were talking about Tolkien, so here we go. In the Notion Club papers, they have a discussion about what's the right technique for having a space trip, and Tolkien has his characters specifically say that the sort of magic pod that Ransom travels in is stupid, right? Because it's too much of a device and it's not believable. And so in the Notion Club papers, the characters are all talking about, well, okay, how would you do it, right? If you wanted to actually have conversation with another now, right? And they do talk about that. They use that Lewis's word. How would you do it? And in the Notion Club papers, the method is there's a meteorite, and the main character whose name I've now forgotten, which is hilarious. Is it Raymer? Yeah, Raymer is learning to dream by way of, like, he touches this meteorite and he can dream the meteorite's dreams because he's been able to, sort of attach his attention well enough to the meteor. It's odd, right? And if if all you know of Tolkien is Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, the Notional Papers will be a bit of a shock, right? But in the Out of the Silent Planet, when Ransom's in his sort of travel pod, right, and he bursts out of the atmosphere of the Earth, and he's then in space, right, and it's suddenly all alive to him, that he has this sensation of, you can hear the music of the spheres and everything's it's like sparkly joy everywhere. That same sense of the different planetary atmospheres is the key to understanding why there's 7 books in the Narnia stories and each of the characters of the different stories, right? So The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is jovial, right? It's the sort of return to life and Santa Claus and everything. It's the happy. The last battle is Saturn because that's the end of everything, the end of time. And the others fit in there, like Caspian is Mars, which has therefore associations both with the war and the trees. Magician's Nephew is obviously Venus. What am I thinking of? Gemini. The Horse and His Boy is all about twins and language and messages and so forth. And Michael Ward, in this brilliant book, sort of read Lewis seriously across all those. It's not allegory, it's atmosphere. And you can see then that he and Tolkien were actually doing something fairly similar, that they're both trying to get this feel of the world seen from the old vision, right? The discarded image that Lewis talked about. And that Tolkien was doing it throughout The Lord of the Rings, which I say what he's actually trying to do is write something that matches the Old English poems that he worked on, like Beowulf, but also the riddles and the Christian poems and so forth.
So I'm just fascinated how popular that both of these authors continue to be, mostly because, because of what we're talking about, this vision from the old world, underlying assumptions that we just don't see nowadays in literature. Why is it still resonating with our culture, as kind of, or am I, how popular is it outside of, I guess, or Christian circles? Is it just us, or does it still?
We're all alone.
I guess that's my real question. Does it still affect our culture? Do other people pick up on this? What is your observation?
Well, the first part of your question, why does it appeal? Because it's about the good, the true, and the beautiful, and people read it and pick up on that. I mean, and what Tolkien says in after the book came out, lots of people wrote him letters, and the other place to know what he thought about his own work is in the letters, and there are places where he'll say, there's no conscious religion in it, but it's sort of like everywhere, right? This atmosphere that both he and Lewis were creating, and that atmosphere is this, willingness to acknowledge the good, the true, and the beautiful. I think, that's what I'd say, right? And that that his writing. Well, Lewis wrote a lot faster than Tolkien, right? And Tolkien tended to niggle a lot. That's one of his famous stories, Leaf by Niggle, where he's talking about, it's an allegory. It is actually an allegory. It's this character that niggles away at this painting that he wants to be made real, but never achieves it. That Tolkien worried in his own, he worried in his life that he wasn't doing the scholarship he was supposed to, because he spent a lot of time teaching and marking papers, which is where The Hobbit came from, right? On the back of one of those papers he was marking. But he was doing it with this appreciation that every word mattered, right? It's like you really want Logos rising. It's in Tolkien's attention to etymology and culture and history and everything. And I'm sure, when people read it, it's hard to know how you're feeling it, but it's like the image I have is from Revelation, right? There's no lamp in the New Jerusalem. There's no light or temple, because it comes from the Lamb, right? And the way, what I say when we talk, I do get to that in my Tolkien discussion, that somehow there's no temples in the Lord of the Rings. There's no worship as such, but it's like everywhere anyway, right? It's all through it. So I think, people read the book and they respond to that, whether or not they know that that's what they're responding to. Now, how popular is it in the wider culture depends on whether it's like, I started teaching the Lord of the Rings course in 2005, and the movies were relatively new and people were still seeing them. As I teach it now, I always ask the students how they know about the stories, and usually a family member gave them the books, or more frequently now, they've been to the movies, right? They've seen the movies and then they come to the books later. That Narnia had a series of movies as well, and there's usually a tension, right, between whether you really like the movies or whether you come to, but by the time they show up in my class, they love the books already, right? And they're already starting to see that the movies are a bit of a misrepresentation of what Tolkien was up to. And there's some discussion on the Tolkien Facebook groups now. One Ring Net just published a piece on how, I think Amazon is doing a television series of it and calling for an intimacy counselor or something. They're going to put sex and nudity in. That will be a true corruption. No, it'll be
Lord of the Rings.
I'm not sure whether it's Lord of the Rings or somewhere. I'm not sure what they're doing. It's a Tolkien project, and they're in New Zealand, and they are. I mean, everybody's looked at it and gone, they want to make Game of Thrones, and it's going to be, and the more porn they put in it, the more corrupted it is, right? I did an episode on stories for children saying specifically Tolkien will be rolling in his grave, and Christopher Tolkien just died last spring. So, what the family is going to say to this is hard to know. Christopher would have probably said absolutely not, but I don't know what the family says generally.
George Martin, the guy who did Game of Thrones, likes to compare himself favorably to Tolkien. Please explain why he sucks and Tolkien is better.
Martin is porn. Martin. I mean, insofar as it's fantasy, right? That's like saying Satan's, in relationship to God, right? Yes, but the Game of Thrones was, I think, intentionally designed. I've read essays on this to say that he does work to disrupt the eucatastrophe, to disrupt the romance, to disrupt the comedy that Tolkien was working with. And so, in Game of Thrones, what happens is all of the characters end up losing their faith in the stories, right? Obviously, if you read the Silmarillion, not all the characters come to goodness in Tolkien. So he's not really writing happy ending. I mean, he recognizes the long defeat without Christ. But Martin's vision is modernity's disruption of our hope.
I've never even watched it because I just recognized that it was complete smut. So
it's smut, right? And it's the smut that, again, I'm just going to keep talking about Ian Michael Jones. It's the smut that Jones shows in things like Libido Dominandi. That you will be drawn in and subjugated. Never mind the ring and usury, right? You will be drawn in and subjugated by your desire to watch other people having sex. It's porn.
Yeah.
I've seen one episode of Game of Thrones, and I was like, I'm not watching this. And I joke saying, because they killed the dog at the end of that first episode. But no, it's like, oh, right, this is a sex show with dragons.
Yeah, yeah. It's sad what is considered good art these days, or literature. What passes as literature, and
it's not trying to pass as literature. It's trying to pass as addiction. The Marquis de Sade, it lives in everybody's Netflix account. and you are going to be given philosophy while watching people be, sexually made into machines.
Yep. Yeah, it's sad. But how did your I know you taught an entire course on Lord of the Rings. I'm just curious how college kids respond. How do they get it?
Oh yeah. One of the things I do for the class, which I obviously can't do for the videos on Unauthorized, is, they have a final project, invite them either write an academic paper or to make something within Tolkien's Legendarium. And judging not by the projects that I've gotten over the past 15 years, they really understand it, right? And I've had beautiful, beautiful work, poems and plays and music and lots of food. When we taught it, obviously this spring, we didn't get to have the party, and no cookbooks in this series, in this set of projects. But they show up. The most poignant comment I had was a few years ago and they've said this to me more than once. They come worried that worried about taking the class because they love the books. And they're worried that what's going to happen in the class is the same thing that tends to happen in all their other literature classes, that they're taught to hate it by the end. And they're typically quite grateful. That's not what I'm doing with The Lord of the Rings. And we have the obligatory discussions about whether or not he's sexist. He's not. And racist. He's not. And that, those are not episodes I've done for Unauthorized yet. That's deep into the story problem. But the place where I get the real divide typically in the students is when we're talking about the importance of genealogy in children, right? It's like all of Tolkien's stories are driven by whose parent, whose children there are, right? It's like if you know, like you've read The Lord of the Rings, you get to the end, you really need to pay attention to the appendices. That's the hobbits, right? These are, family trees, get it? Right? It's growth, it's fertility, it's
you need to get married and have kids.
You need to get married and have kids, right? And the end of the story, the true sort of, eucatastrophe happy ending is when Sam gets home. At last they rode over the downs and took the east road, and then Merry and Pippin rode on to Buckland, and already they were singing again as they went. But Sam turned to Bywater, and so came back up the hill as day was ending once more. And he went on, and there was yellow light and fire within, and the evening meal was ready, and he was expected. And Rose drew him in and set him in his chair and put little Eleanor in his lap. He drew a deep breath. Well, I'm back, he said. The happy ending is Sam has a family, right? And all of the, and becomes mayor and plants lots of trees and stuff. It's like, it's all about fertility, both the character, the people and the plants and so forth. There's not enough animals in it. I'm sorry. It's like dogs in other of Tolkien stories, not enough dogs in Lord of the Rings, but that, the sort of big division that I end up typically in the conversation in my classes is when we read Tolkien's letter on marriage, which he wrote to his son Michael, and he's talking about the difference between men and women and why they go in, to education and what kinds of emphases women are able to bring to their studies. And he's saying, most women want to get married and have kids. He's writing this in the 40s. And whether or not the students, are delighted by that or horrified by it is usually a one great sort of moment of stress in the class. And I'll point out, it's like all of his stories are driven by, this marriage has this, progeny, this offspring, these children.
Well, it's interesting. The first time that I interviewed Dr. E. Michael Jones, I asked him, how do we defeat these oligarchs? What do we do? And his answer was, quit porn and get married and have kids. And that's how we win. I was like, wow, so simple. And it's actually, it's true.
Right. And it's Tolkien's answer too, right? Read The Lord of the Rings, which is not porn. Get married, have kids. Read Lord of the Rings to your kids.
Yeah, that's
right. There you go.
It's a pretty simple pathway to success, but
and do it in joy, right? Because we live in the moment. We live in the eucatastrophe, right? History, myth and history have met and fused.
Yep.
Our Lord became incarnate and walked among us.
Yeah. So, but the global elites do not want us to get married and have kids. They want us to keep our birth rates below replacement levels and keep replacing us so that they can
stop
take advantage.
Taking the rings from them. For goodness
True.
sake.
That's true.
Sam is never, Sam wears the ring. All he wants is his little garden that he can plant and have stuff grow. And when he's had to wear the ring to rescue Frodo, he gives it back. Be Sam.
Be Sam. Be Sam. Give it back. Give it back.
Know what it means to cultivate your own homestead, right? Owen.
And this is the part of the interview that you've been looking forward to the whole night, Professor.
I look forward to all of it. What are you talking about?
I actually saw the movie years ago before I ever, so I didn't really know what I was missing. But when I read the book, I was like, "There's this character that is not in the movie," and you told me, "Let's avoid this."
All right.
But I can't do it. Can you please explain the significance of Tom Bombadil?
Yes, I'll get my text. Here we go. So Tom Bombadil is, he sings, he has joy, he rescues them from the trees that are about to drown them, takes them into his house while it's raining, and tells them the story of creation. Right, it's basically the scene in Tom Bombadil's house, which I did do another episode with somebody else's podcast recently, my theological podcast, and we talked about this in depth, and they liked it. They were theologians, so I have that imprimatur. It's a baptism scene, right? And what happens with the scene with Tom Bombadil is they've gone out of the Shire, right? They've had to leave their familiar place. They go through the gate that Mary leads them through into the old forest, and the old forest is terrifying, and they lose their way and they get trapped by Willow, and they're only saved because Tom shows up. He rescues them, takes them back to his house, feeds them, and then Goldberry's having her washing day, right? So it's raining, and so he tells them stories. This is all, it's like the Easter Vigil, right? If you go to the, I haven't been to an Orthodox service in a very long time, but at both Anglican services and Catholic services, you have long service on Easter night, right? Saturday night, right? Easter Vigil. You have vigil for Orthodox services too, right? You stay up all night.
Yes.
And you tell the story of creation, right? It's like you read the Genesis story, you read the Ark, the water. It's lots of water stories, right? Because you're going to end with a baptism. That's the proper night to have them. You've been properly catechized. You've been brought into the church. You understand the stories, and you are washed clean, right? And if you get what happens to, I won't read the whole thing, but you get the Tom talking to them, telling them the stories of what it is, what world they live in, right? And they, they listen to the lives of the forest. He tells them all about the trees, what the living things are like. He talks about the barrows and the kings, and the history of men, which is told in this very, there are no like personalities in it. It's just, gold was piled on the biers of dead kings and queens, and mounds covered them. The stone doors were shut and the grass grew over all. They don't know this story properly, but this is the first full introduction they get to the scope of where they're going into this story. And he takes them back in time, right? So they end up, when they caught his words again, they found that he had now wandered into strange regions beyond their memory. You remember what I told you about Tolkien in the Notion Club papers, worrying about memory and traveling in time with memory, right? And beyond their waking thought, into times when the world was wider and the seas flowed straight to the western shore. Oh, that's before the world was bent and became round, so it's the flat Earth still. There's I've been watching a lot of Owen recently after I realized I had to know more about his conversation. And still on and back, Tom went singing out into ancient starlight when only the elf sires were awake. That's the stories in the Silmarillions when the elves wake up by the lake, right? Then suddenly he stopped and they saw that he nodded as if he was falling asleep. Now that falling asleep is very important because as we learned from the Notion Club papers, that's the mechanism of travel, right? The sort of fall asleep and fall wide awake. It's falling. That's what Raymer says it felt like. He falling wide awake, wide asleep. Sorry, falling wide asleep. And so here, Bombadil has been telling them stories, and it looks like he's falling asleep. The Hobbit sat still before him, enchanted. And it seemed as if, under the spell of his words, that's very purposeful, right? He's enchanted them with his spell. So he's brought them into the God spell, right, that he's telling them. The wind had gone and the clouds had dried up and the day had been withdrawn. And darkness had come from east and west and all the sky was filled with the light of white stars. And it's at that moment that Frodo then asks, "Who are you, Master?" And you realize that what Tom has done for them is he's baptized them and brought them into their sort of full participation in the full story of Middle Earth, and that they have dreams while they're at Tom's house, and when they come back, there's this moment when they're coming back from their journey and they're passing Tom, and they have this little conversation about, oh, I wonder what it's like for him, and now I have to look that up. That Merry and Frodo have this very interesting little moment where, yes, Merry says, "Well, here we are, just the four of us that started out together. We have left all the rest behind one after another. It seems almost like a dream that has slowly faded." "Not to me," said Frodo. "To me, it feels more like falling asleep again." Now, what I told you, the key from the Notion Club papers, that Tolkien means all of that very, very seriously, right? As a mechanism for travel in time. And so when you reread the story, which you're going to do now, you will now pay attention to, they don't just fall asleep and have dreams, right? They travel in time when they're dreaming. And the feeling of being awake or asleep is a key to exactly what level of attention they're able to bring to their presence in the story. And Tom is the one that shows them how to do that.
Wow. So is he like a bishop? Is he like priest of Melchizedek type character? Because I know he makes another appearance at the end with Gandalf. Like he has like a weird little like side meetup with Gandalf.
The thing is, it's never, Tolkien is very, very good at not making these one-to-one mappings of his characters. And Lewis doesn't really either. Aslan is purely Christ-like, but he's more complicated than just Christ-like. That Tom is, there are arguments to say, Tolkien was writing poems about this Tom Bombadil, and he's just shoving lumber from a variety of things that he's previously composed into the Lord of the Rings and then trying to make it make sense, which is a little bit what he did with the Ring, right? That in The Hobbit, the original draft of the original publication of The Hobbit, the Ring is just a magic, it makes him invisible and that's it, right? And he has to, when Tolkien wrote the Lord of the Rings, he had to then rewrite that chapter in The Hobbit to fit with what the Ring had become in the Lord of the Rings. And so, there are old versions of the story around, but that's explained by the fact that, Bilbo didn't tell the full truth when he told it the first time, but then later, and so there's another Owen reference. There's this kind of Berenstain Bear effect, the Mandela effect stuff, right? That Tolkien is like writing into his own story world because he's then had to explain why there was a different version in the original publication of The Hobbit, and now we have the correct version. And he folds both of those into the story world of The Lord of the Rings. It's completely possible to say he had this character, Tom Bombadil, previously and then put it in. But, I think Tolkien was also attentive enough to the good, the true, and the beautiful that, and I don't know how much whether you write, I've been writing poetry these past few months with some of my friends. Matt is one of them. And you will sort of start with a story, and then things will start becoming significant as you're writing it. And then at the end, you're like, yeah, that was the way it was always supposed to be. Who wrote that story? and Tolkien talks a lot about this. Like, I didn't consciously invent this stuff, right? I started with this problem of what's a rendell, right? This word that I found in this Old English poem. And then he generates this entire story world off of it. How does that work? How does the creative process work? Where does it come from? It's very hard to say. So, the reason Tom is impossible to answer is partly because he's so real in the creative process.
Huh. Fascinating. Yeah, so maybe Tolkien didn't even know. Maybe. Yeah, he's just this fascinating figure to me. Now I'm even more fascinated because he's doing a baptism, which means that there has to be some sort of priestly nature there.
Possibly.
So,
right, but just think of it more that Tolkien was serious about following the stories where they took him. Right?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And that there is, if you read scripture enough, and what, he read scripture and he also read the Old English retellings of scripture, he's caught up in that story problem.
Yeah. So, on a much more serious note, since we're coming to the end of the show, I don't know if you know who Bronze Age Pervert is on Twitter, but he tweeted at one time, I don't have the tweet on me, but I remember this very significantly, that the Lord of the Rings is an actual historical account, that it actually happened in real life. So as a professor of medieval history, is there any validity to this? Could it have just been actual history being dictated to Tolkien by an angel or something?
Well, it's not the Book of Mormon. But so I've hinted at, and this is, I hope you all are curious enough to watch my videos right there on unauthorized.tv. And to subscribe, you have to be like smarter than the average bear. You have to subscribe at Unauthorized TV, subscribe to me, to my, Owen has plenty of subscribers. I need a 3 or 4. And they'll send you a code to then access the main platform. That when Tolkien says he thinks he's writing history. He always says, I prefer history to allegory. And he's doing it on the basis of his work as a philologist. And the episode I just recorded this week, it's called The Int and the Moon, but it's on Asterix reality. This problem of, he had this word like int, which is in the Old English poem, The Ruin. And it talks about the great work of giants. We translate it as giant, right? Giant, int. And, these giants are associated with the ruins of great towers and blah, blah, blah. And Tolkien, what I was talking about just now about with his creative process with Tom Bombadil, he's doing that with everything that he finds. Like he's finding hints and scraps as he would in the linguistic history of English, right? I talk in the episode about the problem of the walnut, right? He worked on the Old English dictionary on the W's. And so from waggle to, he started with waggle and then somewhere in the W's. He's finding the history that we have the traces of. Now, you could say that's what historians do anyway, right? So I try to write the history of the Middle Ages. I only have so many sources. I cannot give you the sort of blow-by-blow accounts of certain problems that modern historians can, because they have, diaries and extended narratives and newspapers and stuff like that. I have a lot less to work with. Or medievalists generally have less to work with than modern historians. Well, project that back into even further, right? We have even less, right? So how that creativity works is a problem for both historians that are working with lots of sources and for historians that are working like Tolkien. He's obviously adding a lot to the whole problem of giants when what we have is 3 phrases and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, right? So he's filled in a lot, right? And so you can imagine archaeologists do this, right? They'll find one stone, right, and make a whole building out of it. That's the kind of exercise that Tolkien's involved in.
I think it was all true. It's all true. 100% factual.
He wanted it to be true in those terms, right? But it's within that sort of imaginative dream work that he's also hoping that he can figure out how to accomplish. There's another question that you asked me there. I can't remember.
I think
well, the sort of reality of the history. Oh, right. So, for example, we've talked about Dr. Jones a lot. That, you know, what he does, and I did some videos with him. They're on unauthorized as well, so you get a bonus. That if you read his books about, you know, usury, barren metal, and you're used to the Catholic, you're used to the Whig history, and you're suddenly reading the Catholic history, it's like you've stepped into a completely different world. You know, it's like as I say now, the Protestant bitch queen had her, you know, cousin murdered. Should have been the Queen of England, Mary Queen of Scots, and said Elizabeth has her killed and, you know, sends her pirates off to steal from the Spanish. Even in periods that we have lots of sources for, there is a problem of, you know, what's the true story, right? And you know, saying, is Tolkien telling the truest of the true stories? I think he's telling the truth of the creator, and that is a good enough reason for me to want to study it deeply.
Yeah, I had a deacon on my show who's also a fantasy writer. His name is Father Nicholas Qatar, and he basically was saying, hey, you know, even though truth is like on another plane, it's, even though it's fiction, it's completely true, but not in the way that we think of facts. So,
but Dr. Jones and I would say logos is working in history too, right? So if you're trying to understand the truth of our existence in this, you know, our existence, right, which is a truth of both heaven and earth, right? That is, it's what Tolkien is trying to achieve as well. He's trying to understand how are we, and you know, Valinor is a kind of heaven, right, the blessed realm, but it's not really. You know, how do we understand that relationship between, you know, fairy and our primary reality, heaven and earth? And Tolkien's wrestling with that all the time. How do we get, I mean, is it contemplation, right? You know, through contemplation, are you able to see the face of God now in this life? In the West, we say, you know, no, you know, worry about whether the saints have the beatific vision. At what point do you get the full understanding of heaven?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely a higher level of truth being explained in The Lord of the Rings than you would find in a history textbook, in my opinion.
They should be the same, right? That's that they should be historically real in that sense. But you asked me, so Tom Bombadil is trying to show the hobbits that truth that they're inhabiting, right? They're in the spell of his words. They're in the understanding of the story.
Yeah. Well, we are out of time on my strict timeline. But any final words on the Lord of the Rings before we part with the viewers, anyways?
You say that Tolkien said he wanted to write a story in which this would be a regular greeting. Elin Sila Lumen Omen Tielvo. May the stars shine on the hour of our meeting.
It's very very, very, very potent there. But
subscribe to my videos. And there's more. There's more.
Where do we find your videos? How do we even get on I can never even find, I think I was subscribed for like a week to watch Nick Fuentes on his one appearance on
Nick?
What he was on Milo's show.
Yeah, I'm not uncensored. That's a different platform. So
what is yours?
We're on unauthorized.tv, and
sounds the same.
Well, no, censored and unauthorized are different. Unauthorized is a platform for culture, much more so than politics. Although we have, you know, it bleeds into it. But we're my history and Tolkien. We have gardening. We have homesteading. We have comics. Right? Vox has put up like audiobooks and such. It's stories and culture and growth. On unauthorized, yeah. Censored is
that's Gavin.
That's Gavin McInnes and Milo and I forget who else they have on there now, but that's different. There's a different character to the shows on that one. Yeah, so
Okay.
unauthorized, you subscribe, and then you get access. With that, whichever subscription you sign up through, you get access to all of them. But if you want to support me, look for the green tree.
Well, Anna says thank you, Professor Brown, and I appreciate you coming back on. And everyone still watching, check out saintsedwardmedia.com. There's a new tab called Book Club. And it is totally just a book club, nothing else. So read the description there, and it's definitely just a book club, and there's nothing else going on there. We just read books, old books. That's all we do. So, but check that out, and if you're interested, send an email. And once again, thank you very much, Professor, for coming back. And let's see, Sunday I have Michael Witkoff, Amazon best-selling author. He's coming back on Sunday evening, so that's going to be a good show. He just came out with a new poetry book. So thank you, Matt, for watching. Thank you all the new viewers that came for Professor Brown and not me. So see you guys on Sunday evening.
Thanks, Michael.